Hi, I'm Nicholas Lodge and I'd like to introduce you to my new fern mold, part of the Nicholas Lodge Flower Pro collection by Katy Designs. This very innovative mold can be used for many different sizes of ferns and either wired components or unwired, for example pipetone or royal icing or a softened sugar paste base. You can then build the fern on top of a cake or a cupcake. So I'm going to show you and talk about both methods. The lovely thing about this particular mold is there are several sizes of the wired components, which can obviously be also made unwired. And as you can see here, you can make the fern in different sizes. So if you had a large bouquet or a large arrangement of roses, you could make almost like a life-size stem of leatherleaf fern. But also, of course, you can go down to the other end of the scale, and if you had a miniature cake or a little small cake, you could of course use little small groups of ferns here. This also shows here, this is the unwired fern, and so obviously like all of the Katy molds, you can just press the paste into here. And this one is obviously a complete leather leaf stem. So let's get started. So first of all, when we are using the mold, we're going to, generally if you're planning on doing wired ferns, we want to use a paste that's going to be nice and strong. So with sugar flower making, generally we're going to use a flower and petal paste or a gum paste. So when you make the fern, what we're going to do is, I'll come on to this part a little later in this video, but you're going to have, obviously this is the smaller frond, this is the medium frond, this is the large frond, and then this is the end. So for example, you could make just one set of 2 of the small fronds, or you could, as I have here, I've got like 2 sets. So of course, the bigger you want the fern to be, the more sets of fronds you would make. So these side fronds, you will always do these in pairs. So you would always make 2, 4, or 6 when you're creating this. When we make this, we're going to use some gum paste or flower and petal paste. I'm actually using here, this is the Renshaw flower and petal paste. Or as I said, gum paste, and this is pre-colored green. You can also of course use white flower and petal paste or gum paste, and then of course color it with some green gel or paste color. And so here this is a nice sort of like a moss green. So first of all, I'm going to start off with the small fern. Now for the small and medium ones, I'm going to use a 28 gauge wire. So I have here a piece of 28 gauge wire. This is a standard 14-inch length wire, and generally when I'm doing these smaller pieces, I would generally cut this in half and then I would cut this into quarters. So I'm going to use like quarter length pieces of wire for these small fern leaves. So just cut the wire into quarters, and see I'm going to put my little ball of paste onto here. And so when this little ball of paste goes onto there, this registers 0.2 of a gram. Okay, if we were using the size guide, on the size guide, that would be a number 4 size. So remember, when we use the size guide, you're going to have approximately 1/3 below the hole of the size guide and about 2/3 above the top. So I'm just going to literally just touch my finger onto the vegetable shortener. You don't need a lot of this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a little corn flour cornstarch. This is in a little pouch. This is actually in a knee-high or a small type. And I just use this for my cornstarch. So I'm going to just roll this into a small, this is about a 2 centimeter piece here. And you're just going to take a wire, 28 gauge wire, and I'm going to just dip this into egg white. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit of egg white onto the end of the wire. And then I'm going to then just take my wire and I'm going to insert this into the little carrot shape. And I'm just going to stretch this down so it's going to be approximately about the length of the mold. All right. So you can see here, this is about, so this is now about 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters long, or about 3/4 of an inch. Okay. Now I'm going to, in traditional Katy method, which I've talked about in some of my other videos, you can obviously brush loose corn flour or cornstarch into your mold. I typically just use this technique of just rolling on my little cornstarch bag here. So I'm just putting a little bit of cornstarch onto there. And I will then take this and place this into the mold. I'm going to initially just press that in with my finger. And then I'm going to use my cosmetic sponge and just press this in with my cosmetic sponge. Now the top part, you're just going to make sure you pull in with the cosmetic sponge. And then I'm going to just take a Dresden tool. Now this is a Dresden tool. This is the wide end. This is a veining tool. There are many brands of this tool, but as I said, so the wider end of this tool. And you're just going to use this tool to pull your paste to the edge of your detail. So you see how you bring this to the edge. You're just going to flex the mold, going to take your fern out. So you see how you'll have this beautiful fern. I'm going to just sort of give this a little bit of shape. I'm just going to mold around the bottom of this like so. Alright, so this will give me my smallest size frond. Generally, I would then pop those into a styrofoam block or a cake dummy to obviously dry for a little time. So you just would put that in. So of course you would repeat this, as I explained, making 2, 4, 6, or 8, always even numbers of the small frond. Now when we move on to the next size, that is actually going to be 1/2 gram. Alright, so this will be for the medium size. Okay, so the first one was a number 4 regular size, which means 1/3 below, 2/3 above. And then this one is a number 6 small that goes physically through the hole. Same concept. Just each of these are a little bit different, especially when we get on to the large one. So again, just going to roll this into, take a little bit of corn flour, cornstarch on your fingers. Just going to roll this into, a little bit into here. Again, we're going to use a 28 gauge wire on this. So both of these ones have 28 gauge wire. Now, in addition to using egg white, you can also use edible glue. So edible glue or egg white can be used. This is pasteurized egg white. This is actually a dried pasteurized egg white. I've just added a little bit of water to, or you can also buy pasteurized egg whites. But egg whites are typically what I always use for flour making, but edible glue will work as well. So we're going to take, again, just dip that into the egg white or the edible glue. We're going to push this into the little carrot of paste. Going to roll this into, getting into a little, just almost pinch around the base, and just use your actual mold as your gauge. All right, so you can see this one is going to be a little bit longer here, so this is going to be actually about 25 millimeters, about 1 inch in length. Again, I'm just going to touch this on the cornstarch, corn flour pouch. And then we're going to place this into the mold here. So again, you see how I'm starting at the end of the mold and just using my cosmetic sponge. It's just the way that I use my collection is just, I always find if you're using the size guide or digital scale, what it means is it just makes it more efficient because you can scale all your paste off ready before you start. And again, here using my Dresden tool, I would just pull the paste into those 2 side pieces here. So you can see this comes into the side of the mold. Flex the mold and it will come out and you have your beautiful fern. Now for the large one, we're actually going to continue with the next size piece of paste. This will actually be 1 gram of paste. So we're now going to go up the size guide, so we will actually now be number 7 small. Okay, so you see this is now going to go through the number 7 hole, so this is 1 gram of paste. All right, this one is going to also be done on a 28 gauge wire. So the 3 smallest ones, the large, medium and small, will all go on to 28 gauge wires. So again, just take your egg white or your edible glue. I've just dipped this in, it's about 1 centimeter. About, you know, just over 1/4 of an inch of paste into there. Mold this around. So again, just press this in initially with your finger. The cosmetic sponge is the technique I use because I find this also presses the paste in. Your pressure point is a little bit more distributed than it would be with your finger or thumb. But it's just the way that I use, also because I'm obviously an instructor and teacher of sugar craft. Sometimes if I have students that have sticky fingers, they'll stick to the paste, whereas the cosmetic sponge is an easy way to go. So we're going to just pull the paste up here. We're going to pull the paste, and you'll sort of see, when you press this into the mold here, you'll sort of see where that little island is. And you see how you're just going to pull away with your Dresden tool. So you see how it actually, so that little island wants to be visible. Just going to flex your mold. All right, I'm going to take the fern out of the mold here. Just mold this around the bottom here. But you'll see how this is going to have this nice open, so you can see actually this like little open part here. So this is going to have this open cavity in the mold. You can also give a little bit of shape to the fern because the wire is pretty much going almost all the way down to the bottom here. So you can see, like, you could, if you want to use these leaves individually, you could actually bend them slightly. So you could either bend them down or you could bend them up. But you see the wire is then gives flexibility to the fern. It's like almost like its spine or its backbone. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the end part of the fern, which is this. Now you will always have just one of those, and this is what it will look like. All right, so this is going to be the end part of the fern. So we're going to use 2 grams of paste here. All right, and so this is going to actually be a number 8 on the size guide. Okay, now usually I do this a little differently because as you can see here, there are like 2 little islands. There's a little island here, there's a little island there. All right, and so if you put a wire in this like we did on the other components, it's going to be very difficult to sort of try and get the wire in between those 2 islands. So what I found is best is actually just to wire it once you take it out of the mold. Okay, so we're going to take your piece of paste. So this is my piece of paste I'm using. So this is the number 8 small, the 2 grams of paste. I'm going to just make this into little carrot shape. All right, so we're going to put a little bit of corn flour, cornstarch onto this. Again, just like we did before, the only difference is we don't have the wire to worry about here. So we're just going to start pressing this in. You see how I'm using my sponge here. Just the cosmetic sponge is the way that I prefer to use rather than my finger. In teaching, a lot of times sometimes I have students who have very sticky fingers, so this means you get better pressure point, but also you don't have to worry about if your fingers are a little sticky. Now you see how one of the little islands has now become exposed, and so we're going to use my Dresden tool here, just going to pull the paste in, but almost you can press this in with your cosmetic sponge, and then we're going to come across here. Now the other slight difference with this particular piece is that also it is a little curved, okay? And you can sort of see the other island is just visible there. So we're just going to just expose that little part there and just work your paste down. And just going to work your paste into the edge of the mold here. So just flex the mold. So generally you just want to just flex your mold like this. Just take this out, just because of obviously we have the little islands there, but here you see you have this beautiful piece of fern. So this could be used just as is. You could dry this flat, or you could dry it onto a foam former, and then you could dust this, and you could use this on top of a cake with perhaps a buttercream or marzipan or sugar paste rolled fondant rose, just as a simple decoration on something like a cupcake. But anyway, so once we get to this stage, now what we're going to do is actually wire it. Because this part is a little bit bigger than the small, medium and large separate fronds, we're going to use here a 26 gauge wire. So I'm going to take my 26 gauge wire, and then what I'm actually going to do here is I'm just going to use my curve of my thumb, and I'm just going to sort of bend the wire slightly, because you can see the fern is a little bit like a banana shape. Okay, so just going to bend my wire just a little tiny bit. I'm going to take my egg white, I'm going to put my egg white onto there. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn the fern over, so I'm actually working from the back here, and I'm going to then just thread the wire into the fern. So I'm just threading the wire through, so I will need to make sure that I get the wire through the sort of each side of the little like islands. Okay, so just going to push the wire through. I'm just going to push the wire through until it comes to pretty much the end there of the fern. Okay, and just give that a little bit of shape. And then you can just stand this up to dry, all right? And so this is sort of how this will finish. Now, when you're making the single fern, which is this one here, this one I wouldn't recommend doing wired, because it would be very complicated to try and get the wire threaded through. As you can see, it's very open. But this is a beautiful fern to use just on the top of a cake or on the side of a cake with, as I said, say a sugar orchid or, for example, a sugar rose. This is a small number 9, or as I said, 3.5 grams. And this one, you would just start off in exactly the same way. This is going to give you this beautiful fern. So this is when it comes out of the mold. Let this dry in, and I'm going to talk about dusting in the next part of this presentation. So these are the wired components. So we would generally leave these to dry for about 2 to 3 hours, depending on ambient temperature, humidity level. Obviously, they could dry a little quicker. But as I said, generally 2 to 3 hours you want to leave these till they're dry. And as I said, the reason why we would use gum paste or flour and modeling paste or petal paste here is the fact that we want these to dry nice and strong. So I'm going to leave those to dry, and next step is going to be assembly and coloring. So here we're going to move on now to assemble the fern. So normally once the ferns have dried for 2 to 3 hours, I'm just going to put these onto a small towel or washcloth or flannel. This just means you have a sort of protected area if you should happen to drop them. What we're going to do is we're going to take some floral tape, and I've cut this with a tape cutter. So this will actually cut the tape into quarters. So I'm using quarter width floral tape. You can also do this using a pair of scissors as well. This is light green floral tape. With this particular fern, you could also use a moss green color as well. So this is some quarter width floral tape. So we're just going to take the end of the floral tape. We're using quarter width tape because we don't want it ultimately to be too bulky. So when doing flowers like, for example, lily of the valley, forget-me-nots, any of those smaller flowers, generally going to use a smaller, thinner tape. So what we're going to do is going to take your floral tape here, and I'm going to start generally about 2 centimeters to 2.5 centimeters, about 3/4 of an inch to an inch down the stem. And then what I do is I'm going to go around with my floral tape, and then I'm going to then just slide the floral tape up to the bottom of the wire. So you just literally, that will just slide up like a tube. And if your fingers are a little sticky, just use a little corn flour on there. And I'm going to tape down about 2.5 centimeters, about 1 inch down the stem. So I should show you this again. You can see here on the leaf here. So you're just going to just start off just a little bit down, because if you try and start the floral tape right here, it's very difficult to get started. So you're going to go around, and you see how the floral tape is here, and you see then the floral tape will slide up and down like a little tube, you see. And so this means that you just slide it up to the bottom of the fern, and then you're going to just come down about 2.5 centimeters, and then going to tape this down. So I now have taped all of my components. Now when we assemble this, we're going to assemble with quarter width floral tape. So I'm going to start off with my leader leaf. This is the larger one that I made. Now we're going to take, I'm using some fine tweezers, and I'm going to start off by taking my 2 smallest leaves, and I'm going to take the tweezers and I'm going to bend them directly at the bottom of the stem, just at a slight angle, one to the right, one to the left. So they're like little bunny's ears, like bunny rabbit's ears, okay? This would be very similar to when we do flowers or leaves like eucalyptus and other things. We use the same concept. These are going to then sit into position. So you'll have, as you can see, one to the left and one to the right. All right, and we're going to then start with your floral tape. Now the reason why we would, though you don't really see a lot of the base of the stem of the leaf, but the reason why we would tape the individual components is that this will first of all mean that the color of the floral tape will all match, but secondly will also ensure that everything stays in place, because if you don't tape the wires, what happens is they spin around or they won't stay in place. So you're going to tape down a little bit. Now, when you are doing, this only applies if you are doing multiples of any set. So like for example on this one here, as you can see, I've got sort of 2 small, and then I have another 2 small. So what I've done there is when I bend the next ones, I would actually leave about 5 millimeters. All right, so just a little bit. So when you would do the next ones, what you'd actually do is once they're taped, you actually would just bend those just a little bit down, about 1/4 of an inch, about 5 millimeters or so, 5 to 6 millimeters, so that they actually come out. You can see here from behind, you see how there's a little bit more visible stem here. Because what we want to do is we want to create the shape a little bit like a Christmas tree. So we're actually trying to sort of, as you go down in pairs. And then when we do the medium ones, again, the first ones would go in bent directly at the bottom of the stem, and then the next 2 would be bent a little bit further down, all right? So you basically create that shape. And see here, then we're going to take now the next 2, which would be the 2 medium-sized ones. I generally just put them in pairs. So you see how you're just going to take these now, just going to put these in pairs. Just be a little bit careful when they go in. You're just going to just tape these in. So you're just going to just tape these in with your floral tape. So it's going to come around with your quarter width floral tape. And you see how this is going to give you this lovely fern. I'm going to come down just a little bit further, and then we're going to put in the 2 large ones. Okay, so I'm showing you here the 2 small, 2 medium, and 2 large. And then we're going to just take these, and these are going to then just sit into position. Now at this point here, once you get whatever you're going to consider the last leaf, you're then going to take a 22 gauge wire. So this is going to give us ultimately a stronger, remember the higher the number, the thinner the wire. So this is a 22 gauge wire. So this will just be added at this intersection here where everything meets. I'm just going to just tape this down. And at that point, once you've taped the last set of leaves in, you can actually just break off the 1/4 width tape, and then you can actually continue down the stem using 1/2 width tape. So 1/2 width tape was just obviously done here with the tape cutter where I've used just one single blade. So this will divide the floral tape into 2 pieces. But remember, again, you can use this with obviously a pair of scissors as well. So we're going to take and just going to just tape this down because it's much easier to tape down a longer stem using 1/2 width tape than it is using 1/4 width tape, okay? And then you're just going to just give your ferns their nice shape, all right? So just going to just give it this sort of characteristic sort of V shape, and that would be sort of how you would do your fern prior to coloring. So now we're going to move on to the coloring. Now we have many options. I'm using obviously like a medium green. This is actually a color called foliage green, which is sort of like a sort of dark moss green. This is a forest green, which actually is a little bit of a bluey green. This is an apple green, which is a little bit of a sort of a brighter, more like a green apple color. So pretty much any of those sort of green, darker green colors are what I would suggest. When you take the color, I generally would work on a piece of paper towel or a napkin. I'm going to put a little bit of my color onto my napkin here like this. Move these out of the way. And so what I'm going to do is going to just use I'm using a flat brush. And what I want to do is I want to brush from the source away from the source. So I'm going to use my brush. I'm just going to brush around the edge of the fern. So you see how I'm using my brush on its side, almost like a sort of a knife blade. So it's going to come around the edge. So you don't want to do this all over. You just want to do this just around the edge of the fern. So generally I would do this on the side fern pieces first. And I'm going to then do the small one here. And then we're going to then just come around your edge. And just almost just then use the brush instead of on its side, flat here. And we're just going to just brush around the top piece here, okay? Just be a little bit careful because obviously the wide ones are fairly strong, but here you just have to be a little bit careful because obviously the segmentation of the ferns. And then we're going to then use the same concept. So you're just going to come around your edge of your fern here. It's going to come around here. This is pretty basic dusting. But you see, this is just a contrast to the original base color. That's why we don't want this color to go all over. We want this color just to be around the edge. So once we get to this point, we're now going to add a highlight color. Now, on the ones that I have here, these actually 3 here, I've done this with a gray color. So what I've done is I've got to use a gray color. So when we put the gray on the green, it's almost going to give us sort of like a heather mauve color, which is very pretty to use if you're doing like a rustic wedding cake or you're using sort of on a winter wedding cake. But you can also use other colors. So for example, this one, I've done a little bit like almost the color of a Japanese painted fern, and that's what I've done there is I've used some pearl white. This is like some super pearl, and so if you take some of the pearl dust and you just dust down the center, and then when you steam this, it's going to give you almost this sort of silvery gray look, which is really attractive. So here I'm going to use a contrast color. So I'm actually going to, on this particular one, I'm going to use some gray. So this is a color called Dove Gray. So you're going to use a flat brush, and just like I did when I did the edge, but this is a smaller size brush, I'm just going to put a little bit of gray highlight coming down the center of the fern here, like this. So you're just going to come down the center, and you're going to come down the central vein with the gray. And gray is a huge trend color, but it's a very nice color to use when you want to sort of create a little bit of a softness there. And you would then repeat this on the back. So you just would just go down the back as well. A little bit of gray in the stripe here. And then once you have got the color completed, we're then going to move on to steam this. So what I just generally do there is you just pass this through the steam of a travel steamer or a tea kettle, just like these. So just the steam will hit that. And what the steam will do, as you can see, it will just give your fern, and it will almost, especially with the pearl, it will give it that almost like a sort of a silvery gray look. So it looks a bit dull here, but when you steam that, just lightly steam it, it will give you this beautiful color. And then this is the ones done with the gray, and you see the gray, when you actually steam that, it's going to give it this almost like, as I said, like a heather sort of mauve color, which is very, very attractive as a sort of as almost like a sort of a highlight. And then this small one here, this was done with the pearl, and then the little tiny, and then the one here was done with the forest green. So I actually used the same color here as I used on the large fern. So that is done with the forest green, and then I've added onto that the super pearl. And then with the ferns, of course, you could use these with so many different flowers. On a Mother's Day cake, you could use the ferns and a beautiful cymbidium orchid. You could use these mixed with roses. You could use other bridal flowers. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. This has been Nicholas Lodge, and I hope to see you all soon. Sweet wishes. Bye-bye.